So as part of the DARGchive series, I'm here to interview Jessica. Thank you for agreeing to be a part of the DARGchive. Jessica's a lecturer in communication and media at Loughborough University. So the first thing that we'd like to find out about is, I guess, what did you study and how did you get to be here?
How far should I go back?
As far as back as you want to go.
All right. I started off being interested in journalism, and I think it's just because that's one of those jobs that people have heard of. I didn't know anyone who'd gone to university before, and everyone I knew just did kind of regular shop stuff, so I didn't have a lot of people in my life that would have suggested other things to do. So I thought, okay, I like working with newspapers in high school. I'll just do that. But by the time I graduated, I was not interested in journalism anymore, and I found I really liked research, so I went to the UK at the University of Essex to do linguistics, and found that I really liked language, but that it was a little bit too formalistic for me, so I ended up going back into communication, but this time not for journalism, for actual just communication kind of research stuff.
And is that where you first got interested in CA, or was that earlier?
Actually, I'm pretty sure I encountered CA for the first time as an undergrad, but I don't remember it very well. So I'm 99% positive I actually read the turn-taking paper as an undergrad, but it didn't really stick in my mind. And then when I was getting my master's degree in linguistics, I remember there were actual modules in conversation analysis, and I didn't take them because I saw that, and I was like, I hate conversation. Why would I want to take a class in conversation? Okay. And then, of course, later I realized it was not what I had in mind, and I got into it more when I was doing my PhD. So I started out encountering it when I took a class in discourse analysis with Karen Tracy, which covered all sorts of conversation analysis, discourse analysis, critical discourse analysis, and even discursive psychology, which was one of the early times that I heard about Loughborough. And then I took a class with Barbara Fox on semantics and pragmatics, which also introduced us. Basically, that class was all about semantics are kind of cool, but pragmatics are better, and CA is the best. And then I ended up taking a whole class on CA from Barbara Fox, so that's kind of how I ended up doing CA.
Okay, so you've had opportunities to do CA.
Yeah,
and
like
then
in little
doing,
bits all the time, yeah.
Okay. And your PhD was at Colorado, Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
So what was it like to be a PhD student there?
It was pretty amazing. The choices I had were between UCLA and Colorado, so it took me a long time, and I ended up having a lot of phone calls from Karen Tracy and John Heritage, literally like, can you decide soon? Because I really didn't want to choose between them, and I ended up going to Colorado, and it was amazing. The mountains were all there, so that was cool, but the research environment was also really, really fascinating and fun. I had access to, obviously, linguistics and all the people doing CA in there, and then also the people in communication doing communication theory and rhetoric and really interesting things that I wasn't necessarily using in my dissertation, but I still found really fascinating and good to think about. So, and obviously I met a lot of people there that were really formative for my research and who I still work with, like Joshua Racklaw, and people who have just been my friends for years. So it was pretty awesome. I've heard horror stories sometimes about people's PhD experiences, and even Colorado was not perfect. I heard some people since then talk about their experiences not being as golden as mine was, but I think I had really great advisors in Bob Craig and Karen Tracy, and a lot of just great people, so I loved it.
Could you talk about what your PhD was on?
So I was looking at morality in interaction, and my committee, so you have like a whole team of people that you have when you're getting your PhD in the US, had Bob Craig, who was a communication theory person, Karen Tracy, who was a discourse analyst, Barbara Fox, who was a conversation analyst, David Boramisa Habashi, who did intercultural stuff, and then Cindy White, who did interpersonal communication. So those were all the influences that went into my dissertation. I remember early on, my primary advisor, Bob Craig, asked me what I wanted to do my research on, and I was talking to him and Karen Tracy about that, and they were saying, in language and social interaction, you usually pick a site, and then you study it. It's usually like institutional talk. You pick healthcare context or education context, and I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to look at lots of different contexts, so I ended up thinking more in terms of like practices that might arise anywhere rather than I'm going to study this one site.
And so thinking about, I guess, this move from journalism to communication and discourse and all these different influences, what would you say are the key authors that you're influenced and inspired by? And that doesn't have to be people who are still alive.
Right. In fact, I think the people that come to mind probably aren't still alive. Well, I had a lot of people that influenced me in sort of even in undergrad. They weren't necessarily people who directly relate to my research, so I got really into Aristotle and James Baldwin, and these are people whose writing I still really admire, but they completely don't contribute to my actual research. I think the more relevant ones would be like Wittgenstein, which I encountered when I got my MA, and then of course Goffman, and Harvey Sachs is probably one of the biggest in terms of like those formative writers.
And so you touched on a little bit about communication and discourse, all these different people, and your work on morality. Could you talk a bit about the relationship between communication, CA, and where morality fits within those two spheres or
right.
things?
Yeah, well, the traditional approaches to morality, of course, are in philosophy. So usually when I talk about how I'm interested in morality, people start talking about trolley problems and moral philosophy and sort of Kantian ethics and things like this. And those are really fascinating, but I was interested more in kind of like members' approaches to morality and how people construct certain actions as moral or hold each other accountable in ways that are seen as moral. And so for me, looking more interactionally and more conversation analytically made sense to kind of demonstrate it in an empirical way, because I feel like if we're just walking around with personal theoretical ideas about morality, it's very easy to get it wrong or to kind of see what you want to see, whereas I find it more interesting to see what people are actually doing in their everyday life and how that can be construed as moral. So that's why I went that way.
And so now you're here at Loughborough, and obviously you spent quite a lot of time in the US, because that's where you're from.
Most of my life.
What have you found as the key differences between, I guess, working in the US and working in the UK?
Well, there's a lot of like boring administrative stuff that's very different. But I think the more interesting differences are like the intellectual traditions and just the way that disciplines and histories of ideas are so different. And I think it's one of the problems with working in the US is even if you have a lot of international contacts, it's very, all the research that goes on there is very US centered, no matter how hard they try not to be. And I feel very lucky that I've had exposure, even at Essex before I got here, kind of seeing that, oh, people define communication in a completely different way and they have no idea, about this other thing, or, oh, people see media studies in a different light, and people even came to CA, for example, in a very different way who work in the UK versus in the US. So that's been really interesting and informative to see.
And at Loughborough, we're very fortunate to have DARG. How can you remember when you first found out about DARG, or
Oh my God.
what are your experiences with DARG? Or
I feel like I've known about DARG forever, but that can't be true. I think one of the early times I heard about DARG was actually after I got back to the US after I'd been in Essex. So I don't remember hearing about DARG while I was in Essex, which is weird. But I remember I got back to the US and I wanted to do a PhD, and I was talking to people like former undergrad professors about, where should I go? I don't know where to go. And one of my future collaborators at the time, Evelyn Ho, said, Loughborough University does research very much like what you're interested in doing, and they have this discourse and rhetoric group. And I didn't understand what she was talking about at the time, but I remember thinking, oh, that sounds really interesting. And then, of course, after I started doing my PhD, I was just constantly citing and reading about these people. So I didn't understand what happened at DARG necessarily for a long time, but I knew it was an important research group, and that, yeah, pretty much all the people who had some sort of association with it were people that I wanted to read their work, and I was always teaching them to my students, and putting their faces on my PowerPoint slides and stuff.
And I guess you presented at the Loughborough's Conversation Analysis Day in 2010,
Yeah.
and more recently in 2018.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about those experiences?
Yeah, so this was the year 2010. I was in my third year of my PhD, which is not the last year in the US. It's your second to last year, I guess. So I had not defended my dissertation yet, and obviously I hadn't graduated yet. And I was going through a phase where I went to almost every conference that took me to the UK. So I went to a conference on, I think it was called Discourse Ethnography in like Aston University in Birmingham, and I'd fly out for just 2 or 3 days, and then I'd go back to Colorado. So I kind of had a strange mindset at the time. These were foolish decisions that I don't necessarily advise. But I remember I came out for CA Day. Obviously, it was the first time I'd ever been on this campus, and the first time I met Charles Antaki in person, for instance, the first time that I saw Liz Stocco flit into the room with cakes and things and then flit away. And there were also all these people in the audience that now I understand were famous, that at the time I kind of just knew their names, but I didn't know who was who, and I was too shy to introduce myself. It was a really great experience to present. I unfortunately had a technical error, which meant that none of my videos played, and I couldn't actually present. So I had to act out my data, which is so awkward and sort of against the ethos of CA that I was sort of mortified at the time. But it seemed fine, and actually the comments that I got from the audience led to the paper that I wrote later on assessments in gift giving. So it completely turned out to be one of the most useful talks I've ever given. But it was amusing at the time too. I wonder where we went for dinner now. I can't actually remember.
I think there will be a record of that somewhere. And certainly that talk is part of the CA Day recording, so it is
It's
forever
immortalized forever.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah.
And more, now you are at Loughborough, could you talk about being at DARG and being at DARG on a weekly basis?
It's the best thing ever. So I've always been really admiring of the idea of having data sessions every week, and the fact that DARG allows you to have data sessions potentially twice a week, every week, is just stunning. I think it really is the best research environment you can be in. It's pretty much 90% of the reason that I'm at Loughborough is because of DARG, and another 10% probably all the people who work here. That's probably, I'm slightly exaggerating. That sounds really bad when I say it out loud, but because the thing about DARG is that the people who are in it obviously are what make it. So there's that aspect. But yeah, I will pretty much always go to DARG if I am physically able to, and it's what I would be here for. So I live for it.
Hashtag live for DARG.
Exactly, yeah. I may be the only one using the hashtag, but I will keep using it because it's accurate.
And so you've also served as the chairperson for ICA, the International Communication Association Language and Social Interaction Division.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that experience and what that was like, and
oh gosh,
would you do it again?
Well, I foolishly then immediately did it again because now I'm in the same position for the National Communication Association in the US. So to some extent, yeah, I guess I'd do it again, but it's really hard. But it's super, super informative because you get to have this entire behind the scenes look at research. You get to see all these submissions from people who are doing language and social interaction research at very early stages. And you see everything from even undergraduates submit sometimes, master's students, PhD students, all the way through to the top people in the field. And seeing not only that, but also seeing their reviews of each other is like the most fascinating peek behind the curtain you could possibly get. So it is a lot of work, but it's worth it, I think, intellectually, for understanding the discipline in a much deeper way.
And could you talk about, I guess, both of those divisions are kind of interlinked in that they're both communication, language, and social interaction. I guess, what's it like to be a part of those communities?
Well, it's interesting that, yeah, in a way, on the face of it, they look very similar to each other, but they've had very different trajectories over time. So ICA is obviously a lot more international, so you get more people from different places, and depending on where ICA is held, you'll get to see different kinds of researchers. So when it was in London, obviously a lot of Loughborough people came, whereas you wouldn't necessarily see Loughborough at ICA like other times very often. NCA, I think, has traditionally had a larger CA focus for some reason, whereas ICA is kind of more mixed. Like, you get, obviously, there's always core CA people, but then you'll get ethnographers of communication and sometimes critical discourse analysts as well. So I like that environment because I think you get a lot of interesting kind of, I don't know, cross-area, like, conversations and people talking at a slightly different level, which can be useful. And then, you know, you can still have your, like, intense data session with all your CA people when you want to.
And so, returning to your specific work and what you're focusing on at the moment, you've worked quite a lot on mobile communication. Could you talk about that project and what sort of key findings you've had so far?
So I'm pretty sure the start of that project was in 2011. Stephen D. Domenico had put together a panel, and I think it might have been for NCA, but now I can't remember because it was a long time ago. And out of that panel, we ended up joining up with Joshua Racklaw to work on looking at sort of how people interacted with mobile phones in interaction. None of us had sort of come to this from our own past research being interested in kind of technology or mobile communication, but we had a lot of data where we just saw participants doing this. And so in typical sort of empirical fashion, it was like, well, this is something, people are doing something with their mobile phones, so let's look at what it is. And I think also we had a sense of there's such a kind of media and common discourse about, oh, you know, mobile phones are destroying interaction, and like, you know, young people, they just stare at their phones and they don't have conversations anymore. And we were sort of like, is that really true? You know, in typical, I think, CA way, you start to combat all these myths that people have about conversation. And so we actually looked at what people did, and it turns out people do still have conversations, even if their phones are there. And oftentimes, in fact, the way that they orient to their phones are highly relevant to the things they're doing in conversation. So it's not a distraction from conversation. It's actually something that people are drawing on as resources for what they're doing in their social worlds. And then since then, I've even been able to sort of look at technology and communication with other co-authors such as Liz Parks, and look at sort of like how people talk about and the discourse about phones and interaction as well. So it's been kind of an overriding thing. But we're still working on that, Joshua Racklaw and Stephen D. Domenico and I. So look for more things coming out, which you might also be involved in.
That's a strange sort of fourth wall breaking, I guess you've kind of touched on that of what is coming, but do you have any other projects, any other irons in the fire, anything that's any ideas
so many irons.
you want to work on, or things you are working on?
So in addition to the more of the mobile communication stuff coming out, watch for that. I'm also working on things related to arguments online with Bing Xiong and Jerry Yuan. And also, so Joe Meredith and I recently got this sort of like pump priming BPS scheme thing to do some politics online stuff as well. So I'm getting more into sort of looking at arguments and looking at conflict, which has been an interest of mine for a very long time, but I kind of put it on hold for a while to look more at, you know, kind of everyday talk situations. So I think more of that will be coming as soon as I can write it.
And if people want to get in touch with you to talk about any of these projects or anything they want to know about, how can they do that?
The internet. I'm on Twitter and Loughborough's, you know, page for me, I guess. Yeah. I mean, you could try and call me, but I'm probably not going to be here. I don't like to answer the phone. Okay, typical cool. Millennial.
Well, thank you so much for the interview.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.